Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to this session on practical tips on preparing students for learning with and without generative AI. My name is Luke Zaffer, and I am one of the learning designers from the HAS Learning Design team. And I'd like to begin this session straight off because there's a lot to cover in 1 hour, and I hope you find this useful and interesting. So, I'd like to begin today with an acknowledgement of country, saying that um, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodianship of the lands in which we meet and recognize that this is unceded land. This is also a place of learning, and it is my privilege to bring some further learning to you and your students today. Now, what we'll cover today, there's quite a lot, as I said, to get into. We're going to get into some of the surveys and integrations that we did last year in the Faculty of Humanities. Um, I want to talk about changing the nature of the discussion about AI and learning, so the framing of it and how we discuss things with students. To talk a little bit about the dangers of using AI and being haphazard in its use, look at some case studies and things that we actually did. Um, and the thing that will be most useful is techniques for your practice. So there's quite a bit to get into here. I will do my best to answer questions as we go, but I did want to say that today's session is interactive. So you will not be able to sit there and do nothing because I would like you to um, join my Echo poll session. So that should come up now. If you've got your phone or you've got a second screen, feel free to uh, put in the code there at echopoll.au. I'll give everyone about 20 seconds to sign into that before I move on to the next slide, because I want to ask your opinions as we go. Now, if you're good to go, just give me a little thumbs up.
Oh, Luke, you've got a message. Your body is blocking the code, so no one can see the code.
Amazing.
No, that doesn't help, Luke. You're gonna have to duck.
Can you just put a link in the chat?
Yeah. Thank you for the person who put the code in there. I'm so glad that we could get off to a good start. I'm not sure how turning off my camera still had my body blocking it, but yeah, 2783706. Well, I've got to be mindful about the design of that slide next time. I'll see you all in 6 months with a well-designed Echo Pole slide. Well, I would like to ask you, what is your confidence level with AI? So you should be able to use Echo Pole for this. So we've got high, medium, low, and none. Oh, the cartoon on my face. Right. Thank you for that. So Marius, if you logged into Echo Poll, you should be able to see this slide. You should be able to vote using either the tool or the Echo Poll. All right, so you know what? I genuinely enjoy these Echo Poll slides because I never quite expect how how people will vote. Now, if you have issues with the echo poll, just put your answer in the chat. That's fine. But it seems like a lot of people have a pretty good understanding, and uh, there's a pretty good degree of confidence there. That's good. All right. So, um, in 2025, in the Haas School, particularly in the School of Communications and Arts and the School of Historical and Philosophical Inquiry, um, we put in place something that we called the critical AI literacies, which is a little bit different to what you might have heard about about AI literacies. But the basic difference was that we were really interested in how students were using it in ethical and critical ways, rather than teaching them how to use the tool in a specific way. And we also conducted surveys across it. So these projects required that students engage with AI while considering their skills in that particular course, what their values were as students and as industry professionals, and metacognition. So that's the thinking about their own thought processes and about their learning itself. These surveys were informal, and they were designed to discover how they were interacting with AI and what their thoughts, feelings, and expectations were. And we had hundreds of responses across this. Not terribly usable data for us for formal publication, but it was really illustrative. We found that students were really concerned, first and foremost, with getting better marks and improving assessment performance. So generally, they touched AI if they wanted to do something better, not for any other particular reason. They wanted to save time, reduce their workload pressure. That was a big one. Students, they're doing it rough at the moment with the amount of uh, work that they have to do outside of university just to live. Knowing what's allowed and what will get them into trouble, and avoiding accusations of misconduct. Students were kind of enthusiastic about the tool, but were terrified about getting it wrong. Some of them cared about whether AI actually helps them learn. They didn't just care about getting the product out there. They wanted to use AI as a private, non-judgmental tutor. So in that case, they were wanting to look at uh, speaking to it in a way that would help them learn the content and have room to make mistakes, to not look silly. They did care about fairness and equity. Some of them felt like, hey, that we're behind the eight ball. We have disadvantages, and we want to even the playing field. Some also cared about their future employability, and AI did factor into some of that. Maintaining their own voice, identity, and authorship. Less important, but it did come up. There were, depending on the discipline, they wanted to build their creative internal voice. They did care to a lesser degree about reliability and accuracy. Um, and a small percentage of students got into surveillance, data use, and privacy, but that was less of an issue. And some of them did care about whether or not staff were using AI, because fairness, again, did come into it. There were some students who felt that a lecturer using AI was a bit of a disservice. They felt like they paid a huge amount of money to be here, so they didn't come here to get AI to teach them. Some other themes. Students were aware that AI was unreliable at times, but they did not verify the outputs. We'll come back to that. Students were very much looking to us as educators to model effective and ethical use. They didn't know how to use the tool in the right ways, and they wanted to do that. Students value efficiency, accessibility, removal of busy work, and the feedback of the tools. So they just wanted to streamline the learning process to remove things that they didn't find were necessary. And that's something that we should also consider, and we'll get to, because if a student doesn't think that the learning is valuable, then they will avoid it. And ESL students, so the English as a second language students, were particularly large as a group who were relying on generative AI to translate. A lot of them were using AI because they didn't have sufficient skills to translate from one language to another, or their confidence was low, and so they were relying on that as a crutch. Now, in the chat, everyone, I want to come back to that point. Generative AI is known to create unreliable and inaccurate information. It's wrong. What might they call hallucinations? I don't like that term because we really don't want to pretend this thing is thinking, but we'll call it, generating nonsense here. Now, students understand this. They still don't verify the information coming out of it. So, how could this be improved in your classroom practice? Do you have any ideas? Oh, Victoria, to your question, students were concerned about the environmental impact. A lot of them, actually, particularly in courses that covered ethics, philosophy, and more socially conscious subjects. So, yeah, that was there too.
In answer to your other question, Luke, sorry, it's Nat Colley here. If they're not doing it naturally, then you'd have to scaffold it into the activity or assessment item and require tangible evidence that it's happening as part of the assessment to incentivize it.
Absolutely. Which is why we will be coming back to one of your courses, Nat. So, an exercise teaching to check for accuracy, explicit fact checking and verification skills, information literacy. Students are not always taught these skills explicitly. Amber is 100% correct on that one. There's not one correct answer here. I think most don't know how to do it. Now that is, yeah, we keep coming back to the skill that they may or may not have. Now, command prompt engineering is an interesting one, and I think that merits further discussion, but I don't get into that as much today. My face covers the slide in key parts. uh, all right, I'm going to have to. My slides will all be available afterward, but unfortunately, because of the way that I created this session, I think my face is going to continue to block. I don't have control over that, even if I turn on my video. Victoria's got a great idea. I like that one. Um, Analyzing an AI generated essay and picking up issues. So it's that modeled practice. Now, I wanted to speak to, thank you, Chloe. Um, I wanted to speak to what students are using and this particular set of cognitions about how they're using it. So in this particular case, it was about them understanding part of the tool and not checking information. The other part I wanted to talk to is about their thinking skills when they're using it. Now, Anthropic released this survey last year about how students were using the tool. Now, while no one in their right mind should be using Bloom's taxonomy, which is a taxonomy of learning, which prioritizes higher and lower order thinking skills. This was in vogue 70 years ago. For some reason, it's still around. But the important thing is that Anthropic, who make Cloud, said that the vast majority of students are using the tool to offload all of their higher order thinking skills. And they're not trusting it for the remembering and the understanding as much, which means that they're using it in exactly the wrong way. They're using it to brainstorm. They're using it to find connections between ideas. They're using it to create the end product. It's a baffling misuse of this topic. Now, a more recent one was that students who were practicing maths with AI were actually getting worse results in the exams because the exam wasn't using the AI in the same way. So if you take away the learning tool for the assessment, they get worse in this particular case. Now, this may not hold out to all disciplines and all things, but the important component here is that if we have an assessment, it needs to match the same type of learning, because otherwise they'll be learning something different to what we are assessing. So I think it's important to speak more specifically about what's going on here and something called cognitive offloading. Now, if you're around last year, you probably heard me talking about this, but basically it is using tools or people to free up cognitive resources. Basically, you get to create a greater mental efficiency and reduce the strain because you're using a tool to do the job. And that can be a good thing. I mean, if you're using a Google search filter, if you're using the library filter, if you're setting reminders in your calendar or writing to-do lists, or if you're a manager of a team and you're delegating tasks, or you're brainstorming on sticky notes, those are all examples of cognitive offloading that create a mental efficiency so you can do something else. Now, hazardous uses are really bad because they create this sloppiness and laziness of thinking and the failure to learn the skills. So note taking without processing. If you've ever seen a student who's highlighted an entire page of text, that is a bad use of cognitive offloading. If you use Netflix, if you use YouTube, if you use Spotify or any other number of things where you use the recommended feature on it, that is a poor use of cognitive offloading because you are offloading the decision of media to consume to an algorithm. It's not interested in what will make you a better person. It's not even interested in what you will find useful or valuable or entertaining. It just wants to keep you on the platform. If you've heard of doom scrolling, which is the process of using a phone on an app like Instagram or TikTok to just keep watching video or picture after picture after picture, that's doom scrolling, really hazardous use. Or using an AI for problem solving, because problem solving is not a skill that we should ever offload to an AI. If you can't see the bottom point there, it is that higher AI usage can lead to greater cognitive offloading and a decrease in critical thinking, which means that we really need to be deliberate in how we use AI. So here's a common problem that's worth chatting about. Students don't do readings a lot of the time. How do you address this issue in your class? It's okay if the issue is I have no idea, but I'm curious. If you'd like to hear me rant about Bloom's taxonomy, I'm happy to do it in my weekly session, Why I Hate Bloom's Taxonomy. It's a podcast. Find it on Spotify while you're doom scrolling. Uh, there's a really good question there in the chat. Why are we asking them to read it? What do we want them to do with it? I love that because it gets to the heart of what we're actually doing here. Because I occasionally come across courses which have like 14 or 15 readings per week, which is just baffling. And it just seems like fun to know. But if students are time poor and we need them to know stuff, then we should be being purposeful in the learning. Embedding readings into activities. Yeah, so I love these. Make them a slideshow. I like the podcast option. There's no one solution here. And every discipline, again, I'm going to say this often, disciplines make the difference. In literature, we can't teach them without reading the text. Peer journal clubs. I like that one too. Now, I want to share with you a different. I'm going to mess up my summary on the next slide because of the stupid camera. All right, never mind. Helping them understand why the reading is meaningful. Adam, love this response. We shouldn't understand that they understand. Students often don't know why they need to know things. Getting the buy-in on that is really important. How often do we hear students say, I wish they'd teach something useful because they don't know what's useful and what's not? Oh, great. Right. So I'm going to speak to AI summaries. Now, I got my discipline natively is philosophy. And if you can't see most of this, basically I have asked it to create a summary of the reading Descartes' Meditation on First Philosophy. Now, um, how many of you would be able to know if this summary is accurate? Or if is there important pieces of information missing? Now, don't worry, guys. Um, yeah, it seems all right. It does seem all right. But for me, I had to look, I might use another AI to check. Now, that's a funny response because how do you know what's if the second AI is getting it right? You don't know what you don't know. Miguel, it's such wisdom in this statement. For me, I looked at it, and I teach this all the time, but it has no context on who Descartes is, why this is important to him. The first meditation omits many of the facts about why he has false beliefs. It doesn't explain why certainty is necessary for knowledge. It also doesn't get why he's having a panic attack in the middle of this meditation. And at the end, he needs to go to sleep because he's just freaked out. Now, the reason I tell you all this is because all of this context matters because the meditations is a sequence where this man figures out what knowledge means, how it's to be determined, and that is the basis for his entire schema for science and knowledge. Um, and then this summary gives us the most basic information of it, but none of the depth, none of the reasoning in it that really gets into any detail. And summaries are a task where the student demonstrates that they understand it fully and they prioritize information by putting it down on the page and they communicate in a different way. So it's the teach it to demonstrate your knowledge by teaching, which means that AI summaries have no value on their own. If we were going to do something useful with it, you'd have to evaluate the AI summary against the source text. And I believe someone else mentioned something like that. But if a student generates an AI summary, which is like it generates a summary, which might be a task that we do with a reading, we need to make sure that they're actually learning. The summary won't do anything unless we're really careful. So here's a real use case as an alternative. Kim is a middle achieving student with an anxiety condition. She forgot there's a science test tomorrow and is freaking out. Kim needs to study a whole chapter and doesn't know what's important and what's not. So she loads the chapter into ChatGPT, asks it to summarize it, identify key points, and create a practice quiz. Now, she passes the practice. She feels more confident. She sleeps soundly. The next day, she passes the exam. Not great, but she did all right. My question to you is that do you think this is an effective use of AI? And what feedback would you give to her? Yeah, I think yeah, there's a good point there that she's violating copyright agreements. I don't get into a huge amount on copyright here, but it is important, right? She is using AI wrong to begin with, in a literally unethical way. At least she's making good use of time and technology left at the time. Now, I'm curious about that. Is it a good use of time and technology? A lot of these other responses indicate that she's not learning. It got her through, makes it more likely that she'll follow the same procedure. She won't remember anything. Yeah. What's gone wrong here for Kim? What could we actually do to help her learning? I like Adam's response there. Planning and scheduling here. There's a student, the student has a known issue with anxiety, which is a real thing and a common thing and nothing to be ashamed of, but she clearly did not plan her time effectively. The assessment design might need to be changed. That's definitely true. Exams are not always very good or ever good. But you know what? Maybe I'm being a little prejudiced on that one. I come from philosophy again, which means we never have exams. Oh, I like some of these results. Set up the AI like a reading bubble. Interactive prompts. That's a neat way to use the learning in the short term. So her use of ChatGPT could be used in even in this limited time frame in a more effective way. Listening might be different. Getting an SAP. So there are other resources here. This is undoubtedly going to happen as an instance, and it has. This is why I have this case study, because this short-term thinking, sometimes minimum viable products happen and we just need to get through the moment. I'm not going to judge anyone for that particular thing, but we have to avoid the habit, which means we have to get into the uses and we have to get into the planning and the structural issues here for her. Yeah, and a number of people have talked about the difference between superficial learning and not. All right. So what have we been doing here at HAS then? Uh, what we've been trying to do, and we are broadening this out, and I have been so impressed with the people and the learning and the expertise and the passion that has been going into that here, where we're building in a culture of effective and ethical use, which means that first and foremost, there needs to be buy-in of the values that we're trying to go here. It's not enough for students to fulfill their obligations. We need people to want to be effective learners. And we need to demonstrate what it means to think critically and be specific about that and what it means to be an ethical student. Secondly, we are ensuring that essential assessment are secured. So when it comes to assessment that cannot be secured, we might have interesting AI integrations or we might have different designs on that. But sometimes we just need to make sure that there's an exam so that there is a minimum assurance of learning. Uh, Thirdly, the redesigning for engagement and assurance of learning. So having an unsecured essay, not a great idea. So we've been looking at different ways to make sure that maybe students are demonstrating that they are using argument maps or research plans or any other number of things that are done perhaps in class time, or maybe just changing the format of the assessment entirely, making it multimodal. There are a huge number of ways to go about this. And it can be time intensive to be sure, but once we do, we have a much greater assurance when the students are demonstrating in front of us that they are learning. And lastly, we're rewriting rubrics to reprioritizing marking criteria, because if an AI can easily make the citation list or make all of the text really clean and professional, then we really need to emphasize things that the AI can't do as well, or that we really want to solidify. The argumentation, the idea generation, the process is less, sorry, the elements of human interaction come up a lot more, and we need to have the rubrics reflect that. It's not that we are trying to cat students out, but we are trying to say that this stuff over here, perhaps the professional writing elements, lots of students are going to use AI in that way. We're not interested in seeing what AI can do, but what you're doing. Now, I wanted to give a small shout out to Commu 2160, Communication Law and Ethics, and Natalie Colley, who did just a bang up job doing all of these things last semester. Now, in earlier iterations of the course, when AI first came onto the scene, it was just an acknowledgement list in the end of assessment. And now there are multiple elements of redesign, which was really conscientiously put through. So we had a sequence of learning where there are activities placed within the sequence to maximum effect. Content-specific activities for appropriate weeks. So we didn't need AI every single time. But some topics naturally lend themselves to talking about AI and its integration. I think it really helps in this particular instance that law, ethics, and AI all come together, like chocolate sauce and ice cream. It's just a perfect confluence here. The activities were well designed to include individual submissions and group work. The lecture was a place where the students could all get consistent messaging, and the tutorials were places where they can deepen their learning. So we had consistency in one area and depth of an understanding in another. And we did go to quite a bit of effort to update the assessment tasks and acknowledgement sheets. So when the AI was allowed in the assessment, there was far more penalties or downsides for getting things wrong when it wasn't allowed. So let me have a quick show of this. So this was the assessment sheet, or a version of it anyway, and the acknowledgements was a lot less important. We can see here that inaccuracies brought down the grade significantly. So if a student decided to use AI to generate the whole essay, now you can't get things wrong in law, and cite inaccurate cases, like made up cases or studies that don't exist or judgments that never happened, because that's an immediate indication that you didn't do the work and could cause real problems in the real world. So it became far harsher a criteria. Something that AI doesn't do well is implication. So if a law is created, it takes a human to analyze it and understand what's going on. AI might be able to do that, but if you're not applying it well, this is going to fall down. Communication, well, there's really no excuse for getting errors on it. So having a student who is able to communicate in an engaging way, which is not something necessarily the AI can do. It can be standard and professional, but not necessarily have any good voice. Knowing who its audience is a big deal. If you type into AI, I want a scenario which speaks to this issue, but you don't specify that it is for an audience of people who are undergoing professional training, then it's going to sound generic and weird, which is why this particular criteria emphasizes natural and authentic writing style. The rubric, the acknowledgements list built in a 100-word rationale explaining the use, which means that a student could potentially get their AI to make them make this rationale as well. But if the AI doesn't know how you used AI, it's going to come across as vague and generic, which again is going to come with consequences. And it also had some peer feedback because it was also a group work activity. I thought this was like a really good iteration, and no doubt it will continue to develop in future because these are never one-off instances. We need to continue to build and develop and iterate as we go. Now, to go over this, to reiterate all of that, when preparing assessment, it's important to design rubrics to differentiate criteria more thoroughly. It's really tempting to have a vague idea of like argument and structure and style and just leave it there. But by pulling apart the rubrics and going into more detail about what we're actually looking for, it's going to clarify to students what they're actually trying to get out of their marks and make it more difficult for AI to do its job in certain ways. There's nothing stopping a student from dumping the rubric into an AI and saying match it to this, but it is going to be a little bit odd if they do. Reweighting criteria, we need to prioritize more, deprioritizing other criteria, and create clear links to learning outcomes. So that'll help build the assurance of learning.
Luke,
Yes.
it's Emma. Hi. Could you please just clarify when you say deprioritize other criteria as AI has strengths in others? Could you give an example?
Yes. So AI is particularly good with its professional communication. The vast majority of information scraped, not the vast majority, but a huge amount of information scraped to create the models underlying AI come from places like LinkedIn, where there's a lot of professional communication, which means it'll sound like business English. Now, if your courses require standardized communication, that's fine. But if you're looking for more journalistic style or scientific styles or creative writing styles, it's going to sound really strange, and you're going to end up with uh, something that doesn't sound quite right. But for a lot of the instances, that professional style will probably get the job done. So we want to say the style and the formatting is less important, maybe even dissolve it from the rubric entirely unless it is really necessary. And if it's really necessary, then we might want to undergo a redesign of the assessment because now the assessment is about that style and about that formatting. Now, what it doesn't do well is connections between ideas. It has the appearance of reasoning, but it's actually pretty poor at it when you look at the logical connectivity. So we want to look at what it can do in that discipline. I've
Thank you.
successfully created short stories in the style of Neil Gaiman. Yeah, it's really interesting. A good way, just as off the top of my head as well, a really good way to use AI in a flipped way is to have the AI critique your writing in the style of Neil Gaiman, because Neil Gaiman then can provide you that critique, and there's some really interesting things to do with that communication then. Anyway, off topic. Let's talk about AI in your practice. Now, I have what I want to call teaching personas. So I want to see, we're going back to the Echo poll, but you're welcome to put this into the chat as well. So I've got some different styles of being a teacher with AI. So style one, come on, obey me, the enthusiast. So in this style, AI is integrated holistically into teaching and assessment. So you're going all out, you're innovating, students are going to be prepared for the industry usage, but it's really high effort. Now there's also the augmenter. This is a person who is integrating AI into targeted lessons and activities. You're providing those critical AI literacies. There's a medium effort cost involved, and the requirement of understanding the technology. Then we have the skeptic. You're only including AI as discussion topics. You're exploring the issues around critical and ethical use. There's a simple integration there, but it won't help the students with the technology. And then there's the acknowledger. So this is oops, sorry. There's an AI acknowledgements on your task list, and you're like, that's it, I'm done. You don't want to get into it otherwise. But this does mean that students will use AI in completely unpredictable ways. Actually, you know what? I don't think I included this on the Echo poll, so if you could just throw that into the chat. Nat, I love the idea of being reluctantly enthusiastic. Augmenter. Now, I want to be clear. I think there's a place for all of these things here. Not every course needs to be in a certain category, and there are places where we could just be like an acknowledger, because many of the tasks may just simply be too difficult to get into with AI. I need the option for wanting to teach the skills but concerned about supporting AI use for environmental ethical reasons. That means, Jen, you are a skeptic. Olivia, I'm running out of funds to be so enthusiastic. Yeah, I actually had to cut a slide for time, guys, but there is a lot of information out there at the moment about how good AI is for teaching and learning and all the efficiencies and how good it is. And a lot of these people come from industry early adopters who are wanting the technology to work. And I love it. I love how much they're getting into it, and I want them to succeed in a lot of ways. But we are still 5 to 10 years away from having a holistic picture of how well it's actually integrated. So we're getting an early adopter bias coming through. Too much of what we said is toxic positivity, maybe. I actually really like the idea of using it to generate data sets for teaching. That's a great idea. Using it to create case studies. One of the other challenges with the environmental concerns is that a lot of the damage was already done when they created the models. That created an enormous energy problem where they needed to spend, just drink rivers dry to make ChatGPT 5, but now the damage is done. So if it costs very little to interact with it, that's worth talking about with students. If the technology was created in an unethical way, but now simply exists, what do we do? So let's talk about some ways to prepare your students for AI use. There's a really good point there in the chat about over adoption leading to loss of skills. Absolutely true. And I want to come back to Adam's point about remaining unethical if its origins were unethical, because that's something we can talk about when co-creating. So firstly, let's talk about sequential learning. Now, I really want to argue the point that one-off integrations of AI learning are not sufficient to foster intellectual values and practices, because the behaviors and the critical thinking and the skills are things that are habitual. They need to be built over time. So if we only put in one lesson at some point in the course and say we've done our due diligence there, they're not going to actually develop the skill in the slightest. It's more like a warning. Multiple touch points need to occur to establish and reinforcement the critical engagement with AI, which is why I loved ComU 2160. It had 6 of them, or if not more, and they were manageable in the sequence, and I think had the greatest chance of fostering this awareness that's ongoing. Which means that at the start of the semester, we need to plan what kind of activities and where they're going to go. And these need to include ethical discussions, modeled use cases, and industry appropriate tasks. Now, I've got a question for you. So imagine that a student acknowledges that they used AI to make the entire assessment. They did none of the work themselves, but they did adhere to the assessment policy requirements. What do you think should happen for this assessment or for future assessments? So do you mean the picture or this case study? No, no. It's actually, sorry. I have taken to making as many of my pictures come from real life photos whenever I can. So this is a real person, and it'll be apparent in a moment when I've made up AI uses, because They'll be quite unhinged. So in this particular instance, it was an unsecured assessment. I love that some of you are like, it depends on what we're doing. So perhaps we could say, what about it's in your discipline and tell me what it is? Because we've had a number of people say that this has no academic merit, and others say it might if it's coding or if it's in business. Sorry, more specific than that, it wasn't just business, was it? Business information systems. Mark the prompt, redesign the task, change the task requirements, and that's cheating, Nat. You've already done this before. All right, add in qualifiers to it. Aviva. Ah, yeah, okay. So all of you are already on this idea already, but it does mean that redesign and failure are both elements that are going to get into. Yeah, and the industry specific skills, like in business information systems, might change the nature of the topic. So I've been vague, but it does mean that co-creation of the ethical standards in every class is needed. We need to encourage students to buy in on this and not skirt the rules or potentially get away with something or avoid the learning whenever possible. That classroom culture that we're building is really important because Adam brought up a point earlier that uh, the issue around the ethics is something that you might have a strong opinion on in the front, and that's worth talking to them about because they might have views, they might not have any, and we need to co-create these systems for our class. Another thing, another instance, another issue. Students, imagine that students have been given an in-class group work task. Several students are reluctant to work with others and decide to work with generative AI as their collaborative partner. Now, the individual students working with AI produce comparable outputs in the activity in terms of creativity and quality. So they do just as good a job. What advantages and disadvantages do you see in this system, in this use? So in this particular case, it's actually just a group work activity, not an assessment. So there is potentially, a legitimate use here, and some would actually have this because someone who is having an anxiety condition or is upset in some way, or we don't know what's going on in the student's life that day, might create. This might be a way to participate in the activity, but also a number of you are also so on point with the idea that group work and working with people is necessary as well. So the intentionality about what the activity is for and why we've made it group work is important. There are students with SAPs who might need to avoid that sort of thing, and that's perfectly fine. We need to be mindful of this. But if we are explicitly making this about human collaboration, then we need to be careful with this. Asynchronous, I didn't even think of that one, but that's a good point too. If the students are offline, we may want to give them opportunities to interact. The AI might be a way to do that if there's no other way for them to interact with other students. So I wanted to give you some more information about scaffolded activities and use cases. Yeah, we also need to make sure they can meet their graduate attributes, even if they have an SAP. That's such a good point. All right, so this was generated by AI, so that you know. I happen to like making horror books covers with this thing. So if we're using, sorry, excuse me. If we're using AI for discipline-specific tasks, that's a good activity to scaffold. So research tools, if we're using it for coding, for the health ones that I know that are going on, using it for Socratic tutors. So these are tools that are designed to help you with your thinking, to challenge your thoughts, challenging assumptions, building arguments, exploring ideas. Any good Socratic tutor will refuse to answer questions and continue to ask you questions until you cry, just like any good philosopher would do. It was actually really tricky for me to make this image unsettling, because it asked me, well, what's unsettling? And so then I had to figure out what made me upset when looking at a picture of a robot, and it turned out to be teeth. I also wanted to make a big use of fostering literacies that may be undeveloped in your course. Now, that's not a failure on anyone's part, but do they have digital literacy? So a lot of students, particularly the ones coming through now, may not understand how the basic technologies work. Most of us as academics and professionals went through an environment where the technology was changing and janky and awful, and so we knew how to use it. A lot of the technology coming through now is so smooth and so user-friendly that when they encounter a problem, they don't know what's gone wrong there. Media literacies. So I want to specifically cite credibility. AI is designed to sound credible. It's trying to sound like your bro, and it's trying to help you. But this is part of the issue about talking to it for feedback. It's going to say you're amazing, and that's not helpful. AI literacies and critical AI literacies, do they even know how to talk to this thing? Because it presents itself as an accessible and usable tool when it's not. It takes a lot of training to use it properly. Assessment literacies, I think this is actually a really important one when we've got English as a second language students. They don't always know what the assessment is asking them for, if it's asking them to generate opinions or ideas, to deal with a topic that is controversial or doesn't have a clear right or wrong answer. Demonstrating library databases and ticking peer-reviewed options. That is a public service, Victoria. Yeah, this idea of sessions on digital literacy and discussing in groups, I want to go to your session. And feedback literacy, I think, is a really big one, because students don't always know what they're doing with feedback. They say, oh, okay, I suck, or yes, I'm awesome. But do they actually build on the skills that they're weaker at and reinforce the skills that they're already good at? This last point at the bottom of the slide, I really want to reinforce, which is that a student who doesn't have strong critical evaluation skills or self-awareness of the knowledge won't know if the AI is telling them the truth or not. It goes back to what I was saying before about me sharing that AI slide on philosophy, that Descartes thing. I know, because I'm a subject material expert, that it's not very good. But to everyone else, to someone who is learning it for the first time, they don't know that. The engineers in the audience would probably call this garbage in, garbage out, GIGO or GIGO. I said it both ways so everyone can be annoyed that I got it wrong. That's a really important thing to know, and students don't know what they don't know. I think someone already said that too, but it was so good. Reflections are a really great activity. They're a metacognitive exercise. They think about the thinking, and they're really important when we're engaging with something new. How did that technology make me feel? How did my learning improve or was harmed? What did I remember from last week? Um, all of the innovations and surveys and experiments that we did found that student reflections were essential components of the process. If your student is not thinking about what they just did with AI, there's a good chance that the learning will suffer in some way. They needed time to think about the experience of using AI, how it made them think and work differently, whether it was beneficial, detrimental, or worth. I think that you're right. A lot of this should be taught in high school, and I think there is a gap, a widening gap between high school and where we're at now. But it's if the problem lands on us, then we have to look at it. Doing a reflective post on a Padlet is an awesome activity because sharing the frustration and anxiety and letting other students know that they're not alone in it, really great. And it can be useful for us to learn what they're doing. Now, I wanted to make a point about AI acknowledgements lists. Now, a colleague and I, Chloe Salisbury and I, wrote a piece for Times I Read, and this is an argument that we're making. So it's not absolutely true, but I want to put the argument to you that an acknowledgement list is, oh, okay, so there's a mistake on this slide. Acknowledgements are of little value because students will be permitted to use AI unless this assessment is secured. So students acknowledging AI have every reason to lie about it because we're prejudiced. If you see a student using AI in a lot of ways, you're probably going to think it's bad or be annoyed by it. And you wouldn't be wrong. It doesn't demonstrate effective use. It doesn't teach them how to use the tool, and it gives incomplete information. So just to summarize in the last minute here, create a prep plan for your AI integration in your course and co-create a set of ethics with your students. Frame the use of AI deliberately and specifically. Avoid being vague. But teaching them not to acknowledge is mostly plagiarism. We'd have to get into that later because it's a good question. Ensure that there are multiple opportunities to engage with the tool. Be mindful of the accessibility and diversity uses of this tool because we don't want to punish people who are having a hard enough time as it is. Scaffolding, really valuable. Reflections, also valuable to ensure the critical thinking. And I'd also like to share with you the role of your faculty learning designer. The assessment transformation learning designers embedded in every faculty now are here to help with this sort of thing. Also, not AI generated. I have these toys sitting on my desk. I am not calling anyone a dinosaur, by the way. Anyway, I hope this session was of use to you guys, and happy to follow up with all of you at any point. There is a lot to be done in the space. There is many more things for us to learn, myself included, but I want to thank you for your time and for your attention.